Well, ain't this crazy? I've been making YouTube videos long enough that there's now a third running of the Saudi Cup. I remember back in the good old days when there was only one running of it, the inaugural running, and then COVID happened and all the other crazy stuff that's going on in the world. But, the one thing that's been consistent is horse racing, so, for the third year, I'm going to be talking about this field for the Saudi Cup. In post position number 1, we have Country Grammar, who is Bob Baffert's entry for this year, and honestly, he's probably the weakest one we've seen so far. Mucho Gusto came off the Pegasus World Cup, and Charlton was coming off the Malibu Stakes, and was looking hotter than ever, and then he got retired, but that's besides the point. Country Grammar, sure he's coming off a Grade 1 win just like those other two, but that was back in May of last year, and he hasn't run a single time since. That's over, 8 months. That's not exactly a good thing to do, especially when you're shipping a horse overseas to the richest horse race in the world. I just don't think he's going to maintain the same level of ability that he showed in the Hollywood Gold Cup. I think he's going to be a step below. Maybe later this year we'll see him back to his normal self, but I think this race is not going to be showing him at his best, and you kind of have to be at your best when you're running in the $20 million Saudi Cup, so no thank you. And then we switch to the other America, South America, for our next contender, Aero Trem, who, as far as South American contenders go, he's a pretty good choice to take him overseas, as he won one of the biggest dirt races in all of South America in his last career start, the Gran Premio Latinoamericano, and he did it pretty impressively, but there's still a lot for him to do here. In 5th place in that race was Mirañake, who has raced against American horses before, and let's just say he's never won. He did come close in the Marathon Stakes, but most of his performances on dirt against other American horses have been rather subpar, and he finished 5th behind Aero Trem in that race, which kind of shows the kind of competition he's been running up against, and maybe is not a good sign of what he's going to be having to deal with in the Saudi Cup by comparison. So, no thank you. Then we have the hard-knocking Midnight Bourbon, who's raced in Grade 1 company 6 times and has finished on the board 4 of them, which is certainly impressive. He just seems to not be able to get it done. He's pretty close and he's pretty game, but he just never really gets it there, which would make him a pretty ideal choice for 2nd or 3rd place in this race, and you would be right, but for some reason I feel like just not picking him. I don't really have a solid reason for it, but I just feel like this might be the race where he slips up and he decides to give us a more subpar performance. And I could definitely be wrong, and I'll take the L on that one if he does end up actually winning this race or giving us a gallant second, but for some reason, something in my gut tells me that he's not going to give us an up-to-snuff performance in the Saudi Cup, and we're not going to see an easy 2nd or 3rd. Next, we get to talk about one of the British horses, Real World, and he looks pretty good. He's racked up a 5-race winning streak at distances from 1 mile to 1.25 miles in graded stakes company, and his most recent performance was a knockout in the Zabil Mile. Looks pretty good, but none of those races were on dirt, and that won't do it for me. I just have a simple rule, and that is, if a horse has never ran on a certain surface before, I'm just not going to count him. Of course, I've been proven wrong a few times, such as with a later contender, Magny Cours, who I'm actually going to be choosing later on, but 9 times out of 10, if a horse has never ran on a surface, don't expect him to do good things. Of course, there's an exception to every rule, but it's just a safe bet to not go with a horse that has never been proven on something before, so I'm going to pass on Real World here. And then in post position number 5, we have Emblem Road, who's one of the 2 local Saudi horses in this race. He's very lightly experienced, only running 8 times in his career, and all of them were at King Abdulaziz, which is certainly a unique trait, and with 6 wins from 8 starts, you'd think he'd be a pretty easy choice, but to put it bluntly, he's raced against practically nobody. He's barely gone further than a mile in his career, and he's only won as good as a listed stakes race, so jumping him into an international Group 1 doesn't sound like the best choice. Although his trainer is optimistic that a 1.8 miles will suit him better, which, that's nice to hear at least, but everything else points to him just not really being up to snuff. So, pretty easy toss. Then in post position number 6, we have Mandaloun, who is the easy favorite, and you know what? I can't really go against him here. The now dual Grade 1 winner, both times ironically by disqualification, is hoping to finally get that elusive top-tier win without the need of another horse coming down. I think this might be it for him, kind of in the same vein as Mystic Guide finally winning the Dubai World Cup last year. I think this is his time to shine. He hasn't looked any better. His battle-tested victory over Midnight Bourbon and the Louisiana Stakes proves that he has not lost a step whatsoever. And in 9 career starts, he's only had one bad out, facing off against the toughest 3-year-olds in the country all year. I think that's a pretty open and shut case to say that Mandaloun is a very easy and very safe favorite to go here. I think it's just a matter of adding some spice to it by adding some stuff down under. So yeah, Mandaloun, pretty easy choice here. He's a nice gutsy horse. He's the exact archetype of an up-and-coming champion ready to get his international Group 1. And then right beside him is a horse that I talked highly about when I was covering another European, and that is Magny Cours, and now I'm going to elaborate a bit. I think Magny Cours fits the same archetype that Mishriff had last year, as, against what I predicted in that race, he actually finished a pretty gallant third in the Dubai World Cup, flying late behind Chua Wizard and Mystic Guide. A pretty impressive first-time performance on the dirt, and why I say there's an exception to every rule. Since then, he's won 2 races, including one at the Saudi Cup's distance of 1 1/8 miles, which is pretty nice, but I think the best part about this is his come-from-behind style. He kinda ends up flying late in most of his races, which is perfect because Saudi has an incredibly long home stretch, exactly what he needs for a good performance. And then right beside him is O Keynes, which is another horse that a lot of people are picking, but I don't really like him as much as everyone else does. Does he have great qualities? Certainly. His last performance was a Grade 1 win at 1 1/8 miles on the dirt, which is exactly what the Saudi Cup is. However, we've heard this story before with the horse who came second behind him in that race, Chua Wizard, who last year was the exact same horse as O Keynes, and he finished 9th. Of course, he did eventually rectify that with a second in the Dubai World Cup, but I have a feeling that history might repeat itself here. Because if we go another year back to the inaugural Saudi Cup, we have Chrysoberyl, who was an undefeated winner of the Champions Cup going into that race, and he finished 7th. So 2 years now, we've had the Champions Cup winner run in Saudi and do terribly. Why should O Keynes be any different? And then we're back with the Americans with Art Collector, and the last time I talked about him, it was not favorable going into the Breeders' Cup Classic. However, I think this race is a lot more optimal for him because all of his biggest victories have been at 1 1/8 miles, and the Saudi Cup is, well, 1 1/8 miles. This is the same distance that Art Collector won the Grade 2 Bluegrass, Grade 2 Charlestown Classic, and Grade 1 Woodward Stakes, and he won't have as much competition for the lead as he did in the Breeders' Cup Classic, and he won't have to go for as long, so this race has a lot better circumstances for him, so while I may not pick him today, I think you should keep him in mind. And then to complete the annual duel of local Saudi champions, we have post position number 10, Making Miracles. And honestly, it would be a miracle if he won this. He has ran on Saudi Cup day before, but that was in the Red Sea Turf Handicap. Still, he finished a credible 3rd, but this is a completely different story, because he's a triple Group 1 winner on the dirt. As well as that, going into this race, he is riding a 3-race winning streak, all of them coming on Saudi's local racetrack, Riyadh. But I just don't think it's going to be enough, because we've seen other local Saudi champions ride even more impressive winning streaks and run pretty poorly. The only exception to the rule would be Great Scott, and, well, as I said before, he's an exception. 9 times out of 10, if you run a local Saudi horse against international company, you're not going to get anything good, and that's what I think is going to happen with Making Miracles. But, I mean, you never know. And then we have Sealiway, who is the only horse in this field who can claim to have defeated the mighty Mishriff, who is the defending champion in this very race. However, even with that being said, I'm not going to pick Sealiway for the same reason that I'm not going to be picking Real World. He's never raced on dirt. Sure, he's an incredible turf horse, able to take down even the mighty Mishriff as well as other European champions, but we've never seen him run on the dirt, so all of that means practically nothing to me. So for that reason, I'm going to skip on Sealiway, and we'll just see what happens. Next, we have the oldest horse in the field, the 9-year-old Secret Ambition, who last year won the Godolphin Mile, showing that he wasn't just done with racing just yet. And that's pretty impressive to say the least, and his only start as a 9-year-old was a gallant second in the Al Maktoum Challenge Round 2 behind Golden Goal. Another nice performance, but that was at a mile, and his attempts at above a mile have been subpar. The best we've seen from him was a 5th in the Al Maktoum Challenge Round 3, which is not good in my eyes. I also just think that he might just be a little too old for this sort of thing, especially when it's outside of his comfort zone. He should have tried another race. Then to round out the last two contenders, we first have the big Japanese upset winner of the Breeders' Cup Distaff, Marche Lorraine, and their owners have gotten no less bold since her win in that race, becoming only the second mare ever to run in the Saudi Cup, behind Midnight Bisou, who was second in the inaugural running. Will she run as well as Midnight Bisou? No way. The reason why Marche Lorraine ever won the Breeders' Cup Distaff in the first place was because of a serious pace meltdown, and this race doesn't seem to have the ingredients to produce that sort of thing. Of course, she'll benefit from a long home stretch, but I just don't think it's going to happen. As well as that, her last attempt at beating male horses was a 8th place finish against O Keynes and Shua Wizard, both horses that I don't actually consider very good in this sort of race either. And then lastly, we have the defending champion, Mishriff, who I think is no less good of a choice now as he was last year when I predicted him running a standout performance. Mishriff loves Riyadh. The long home stretch is exactly what he needs because he's not the fastest horse around. He's a horse who slowly eats up ground and chokes you down that home stretch. The longer the stretch, the better, which is why he was so good in Saudi, and also just because, well, he's Mishriff. He's an amazing racehorse. And some might be worried about his 4th in the Champion Stakes behind Sealiway. Well, keep in mind that when he ran in the 2021 Saudi Cup, he was 8th in the Champion Stakes before going into it. So, him finishing twice as well in the Champion Stakes before this, I don't think I'm going to be very worried. I have a good feeling that we're going to see the same Mishriff we did last year, slowly eating up the competition. And maybe my lofty expectations will fall, but you know what? I'm willing to go all the way on this one. I like Mishriff, and I'm ready to see him try and win this again and make history. And that concludes this field for the 2022 Saudi Cup. And what are my picks? Well, I think it's going to go a bit like this. I predict Mishriff is going to win this race, and the way he will is by slowly wearing down Mandaloun, the same way he did last year with Charlatan, and then coming late for third will be the late closing Magny Cours. So, a nice little trifecta, Mishriff, Mandaloun, and then Magny Cours for some extra money. And that concludes my 2022 picks for the Saudi Cup. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Tell me who you think is going to win the Saudi Cup, and see you guys next time.